Why should you do research? Well, most of what we read, see or hear is a product of someone's research, and the rest will be the product of someone's fertile imagination. A good reader and a good listener will be able to understand the difference, or at least be skeptical about what is given to her. When I used to prepare questions for a popular TV show, my team head always insisted on providing proof. We had to give 3 proofs. Accepted sources were mostly government websites, books, or encyclopedias. The question might be interesting, but if it is not based on an authentic source, the entire show collapses and we might be taken to court. Even for those silly questions, we had to give proper sources. One mistake and everyone loses. The sources we choose are hence extremely important. This is an age where anybody can propagate false information. A good researcher's job is to break the chain of false information. A good researcher, by documenting the sources correctly, avoids plagiarism. Taking credit for someone else's intelligence or creativity is a crime. Read the MLA guide to understand how honest we must be in quoting someone else's words. There is no beating around the bush. If a person has said a single word and if you have used it, you have to mention her name and the page number of the book from which you got it. When we teach or set a quiz or a question paper, we learn a lot. This is true for research as well. It is tiresome, but we learn through it. Doing research for 8 months in the scorching heat of Chennai for the TV show made me disciplined, and it helped me be rigorous in searching for authentic information. It was no wonder that I was able to create content for my academic research while simultaneously working for this show. My brain was sharp as ever. I had to defend the questions I created within my team, and it helped me to think about the usability of those facts that I converted into questions. Anybody can ask a difficult question, but what matters is who can ask a question that takes a little bit of effort from the participant and at the same time give something useful for the audience and get them to say, "Oh, I knew that. That was an interesting fact. Yes." Once the audience hears the question read out by the host, it does not matter whether they share the happiness of the contestant in winning the cash, but what matters to them is, so what? What is the use of this information? Does it have any relevance to my life or the books I read or the way I live my life? If yes, then the research has value. So when you're going to choose a topic, your job is to convince the reader that it has significance. It's all about getting to the why. The reader or your junior will think, why should I read this research paper? Why should I read this project? In the case of literary analysis, you state an opinion or an assertion. Then you back it up with examples from the text. Then you explain how those examples support your assertion. And finally, you tell the reader why your assertion has significance. So what? So what? That is a question you need to answer. You state your assertion or your thesis statement, then give examples, then explain the examples, and then describe the significance of your assertion. Why does it matter? That's the question you need to answer. Why? Where do you get your information from? You get them from various sources. What are good sources? It depends on your assertion. If you need to state something from the life of an artist, her autobiography might be a good source. But if you want to examine the merit of her art, it will be better to choose a book about her art written by another established figure or an expert. Likewise, Government websites or encyclopedias like Britannica, non-fiction books by experts are all good sources. If you want to prove why a character in a story behaves in a particular way, you have to justify the argument by quoting examples from that particular story, from that text. Wikipedia has become an excellent source because of the effort put in by several committed people. You can use it, but back it up with other sources as well. Cite Wikipedia if you use it, together with other sources you refer to, back up that data. It is always best to check for as many sources as you can and not rely on a single source to prove a point. Research is all about producing reliable information. Someone who reads your work must be able to derive something out of your study. For instance, a student reading the poetry of W.B. Yeats might feel the need to study Indian mythology after you write a paper analyzing the impact of Indian mythology in Yeats's poems. If one person is inspired by your work to investigate further, that itself is an achievement. Sometimes you might also have to take the help from the research done by others just like you. So you can quote their findings in your paper to help you defend your assertion. This is one of the reasons why a dissertation will have a section called literature review or review of literature. So what happens in a literature review? In a literature review, you present to the readers the history of the most relevant to your title. So most relevant studies conducted, let's say on Hamlet. So this is not just about stating monotonously, she wrote that or he wrote this. No. It is in the review of literature that you dig up knowledge gaps. To put it plainly, you get to find faults of others. But some of us just find faults and leave it at that. A researcher has to be responsible and accountable. If she points to a knowledge gap, then she is taking up the responsibility of making an attempt to fill that gap. She has to say, see, here this author studied about this aspect, but she did not look further into this. I believe there is a scope to analyze this. So in a literature review, you evaluate previous research, identify the experts in the field, identify key questions, and evaluate the methodologies used in the past. In the review of literature, you lay the groundwork for the audience to understand why your work matters and what method you will hence follow in your hunt for knowledge. You try to find as many sources as possible with regard to the topic you have chosen. Say you are writing about the theme of procrastination in Hamlet. Regicide. Regicide means the killing of a king. So it's a very touchy matter because Hamlet is going to kill the king of Denmark. Claudius is his uncle, but then committing regicide is a very sensitive issue. So what does Shakespeare do? Shakespeare is presenting the murder of a king in front of a queen, Queen Elizabeth. So she must have witnessed the play in her days. How does Shakespeare deal with this issue, and how is this device or technique or the trope of protagonist delaying the task of killing the king relevant to the contemporary audience? Suppose the title for your project is Regicide in Elizabethan England, procrastination as a trope in Shakespeare's Hamlet. In this paper, I try to examine how Shakespeare carefully invites the audience to think about the act of killing the king. The audience is made to reflect upon the justice part of the act. What is the relevance of procrastination in the context of killing a king? After all, he is not delaying having food or visiting Norway. He is delaying the act of killing the most powerful person in the country. Why can't Hamlet just take his sword and get it over with instead of boring us with a series of salakis? Often we find people assassinating strong leaders if they don't bend according to their demands. What happens to the person who is given the task of killing the king? By using the trope of procrastination, Shakespeare leads the audience to think about the concept of justice and the need for thoughtful action. It also shows them what awaits a person who takes this path. The play Hamlet is your primary text. All the studies or research papers or books written on Hamlet will be the secondary sources. The secondary sources will help you to defend your assertion. You have to cite all the content you take from both the primary and the secondary sources. Citing of sources is done inside the text as well as at the back end of your project. So when you paraphrase someone's words taken from a text, you have to mention the name of the author and the details of where it was documented by the author inside the text. Details like the name of the book or the page number will help the reader to track your sources. And then at the end of your project, you'll have a page called Works Cited, in which you need to document alphabetically all the books you have used or quoted in your project.